Hello, and welcome back to Raised by Giants, where we talk all things spirituality. I'm Ryder Lee. Tonight, we have very special guest, author and researcher Christopher Jon Bjerknes. But before I introduce him, Raised by Giants is on Rokfin. Go over there, set up a Rokfin account. I release one premium video a week over there, and it is less than a YouTube premium membership. And you'll get all of my premium content when it gets released, but all of the other creators' premium content as well. Check the link in the description to sign up for the video streaming platform, Rokfin. Also, check out C60 Purple Power. It is the most powerful antioxidant on the planet. It helps with energy levels, skin problems, infections, eyesight, brain cognition, EMF radiation, and a lot more. It is a free radical sponge that gives your body the ability to heal itself. And if you use promo code Giants10 from the link in the description, you'll get 10% off your entire purchase. I highly recommend it. I've been using it for over a year now with my own money, and I wouldn't recommend something that doesn't work. So check the link in the description to purchase your C60 Purple Power today. So without further ado, introducing tonight's guest, Christopher Jon Bjerknes. He is a researcher, author, best known for his scholarly investigations of the origins of the occult, beliefs of Christianity, Gnosticism, and the Kabbalah, as well as taboo history of the world wars, the Armenian genocide. He has published more than 20 books on these subjects and more. Hello and welcome to the show, Christopher. Good to see you. Thanks so much for coming on. How are you doing?
I'm very well. How are you? And thank you for having me.
No problem. I have been doing a lot of research on you and a lot of the things that you've been talking about and your studies, and find it really interesting. And you explain things in such a detailed way that really brings everything together. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation here today. And let's just start off with a little bit of background on you and how you got into this research and researching the occult and the Kabbalah and the origins of Christianity.
Well, ever since I was a child, I've been aware that Christianity has adopted and adapted a lot of Greek thought. Even as a kid, I knew that Aesop's fables had been incorporated into the mythology of Jesus Christ. And then as I began to study Platonic philosophy, I got into the Hellenization of Judaism through Philo Judaeus of Alexandria and his incorporation of the Platonic concept of the Logos, which Plato adopted from Heraclitus. And that led me down a long path of research. I also got into physics, and I incorporated those two things together. Genesis opens up with the idea of the winds of God, of the gods moving upon the waters, and I recognized that that was similar to Thales and Empedocles and the Greek concepts of the ether. So I had always realized that there was this syncretic blend of Greek ideas and Canaanite ideas in Judaism. And then that took me down the path of studying Albert Einstein, because I discovered that my ancestors had ethereal theories of electromagnetism and gravitation. And I wanted to discover why it was that relativity theory won out over those theories, because I thought that those theories were superior in that they were actual physical theories as opposed to abstract geometric representations of phenomena that amount to nothing more than a human conception of mathematics and geometry. And I thought that science was being impeded from engaging in experimentation with the ether by relativity theory. So I read a book called The Principle of Relativity, so I could learn what relativity was all about, because it was always possible that I was mistaken, and there were very valid reasons for abandoning ether theories. And that was a book that combined and compiled the papers of Albert Einstein, Lorentz, and Minkowski. And Lorentz's work predated Einstein's work. So his papers from 1895 and 1904 appeared in the book before anything that Albert Einstein wrote. And when I read the book, I realized that Einstein had simply repeated what Lorentz had said, but there were no footnotes in Einstein's papers. So I discovered that he was a plagiarist. And then I went down a long road and I realized that where Einstein deviated from Lorentz, and especially in his supposed rejection of the ether, he had taken from another man named Henri Poincaré, who had come up with the principle of relativity of electrodynamics, the relativity of simultaneity, and procedures for synchronizing clocks, which resulted in relative simultaneity. So that there was nothing new to Einstein's paper. And I read Edmund Taylor Whitaker's book, and he said that the only two things that Einstein came up with to contribute to what he called the Poincaré-Lorentz theory of relativity was his equations for the Doppler effect and for aberration, which were very minor calculations as opposed to the formulation of the Lorentz transformation, et cetera.
So Einstein being like a copier, being just plagiarizing people and doesn't come up with anything on his own.
Right. And Professor Anatoly Loganov demonstrated thoroughly that Lorentz's theory was not only, Poincaré's theory was not only prior to Einstein's, it was vastly superior and beyond Einstein's comprehension. So I wanted to know why all this hype took place around Einstein. I began exposing Einstein on the internet in 1995. When Windows 95 first came out, I had a German friend who schooled me on how to get online and let people know what was going on with Einstein. And when I did that, I got accused of anti-Semitism and widely attacked and all of that. And so I started digging into Einstein more, and I discovered that he was actually a vicious racist, and that his brand of political Zionism was, in fact, very racist. And the UN had declared and branded it a form of racism in a UN declaration. And that took me down a long path of researching all of that. And then I began to study how Zionism and Nazism interplayed with each other and sponsored each other and were fundamentally identical in their precepts and in their support of one another. So
that's a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow right there. That one.
It is, well, understandably so, that these people would betray their own people to a horrible fate on both sides. The German people were betrayed into waging a staged battle against Stalin and the international bankers, which had been organized and set up by the international bankers and by Stalin. It was pointed out in the Nuremberg trial. Some high-ranking Nazi official pointed out that Stalin had helped to fund Adolf Hitler, and the Warburgs, who were the leading Zionists in Germany, helped to fund Adolf Hitler. And a former chancellor pointed out to Winston Churchill that the two biggest sponsors of Hitler and Nazism were both international bankers, and one of them was the head of Zionism. But those who are incredulous about what I'm saying, you can either read my works or you can read the works of Mr. Black on the transfer agreement. And that will clue you in to the uncontroversial fact that the Zionists worked together with the Nazis to establish Zionist camps in Nazi Germany. The Zionists were the only people allowed to run their own newspaper, to fly their own flag, and to wear their own uniform, which deviated from the Nazi uniform in Nazi Germany. They had an arrangement. Their Jewish people were obviously under tremendous duress from the time that Hitler was appointed chancellor by Hindenburg in 1933 through 1939, when World War II began. And they created a tremendous incentive for emigration out of Germany. And then the bankers worked to block off all ports of exit except for Palestine. Two Jewish people who were trapped in Germany and later in Greater Europe as Hitler advanced, but they offered a carrot and a stick. They wanted the finest German Jewish minds to emigrate to Palestine because these were highly educated, very sophisticated people who had the talents, the gifts, and the intellect to construct a new nation. So they coerced them into obliging this transfer agreement, which had been arranged, not arranged, but designed by Theodor Herzl in his book, The Jewish State, in 1896. He proposed exactly what became Nazi Germany and the transfer agreement. He said in his diaries that anti-Semites would be the best friends of the Zionists and would provide the impetus which would force European Jews to emigrate to Palestine against their will. So they established this transfer agreement in 1933, whereby Jewish professionals could put up a given sum of money, and then those monies would be given to the German government, who would then transfer them to a bank that was established in Palestine. They would get the money back once they had emigrated. The Germans would benefit by running all of the ships which transported these unfortunate souls to Palestine. And there were other economic benefits for the Nazis. They received oranges and all other kinds of things at the same time that boycotts were being orchestrated to supposedly unseat Adolf Hitler. The very top-ranking bankers and Zionists cooperated with Hitler to establish this transfer agreement. So they worked it from both ends, and that is what kept Hitler in power. And these same forces undermined all of the international boycotts. Much is made of a banner headline that appeared declaring that Judea declared war on Germany, but it was all a farce. And it provided the pretext for Hitler to go along with the transfer agreement, which again had been designed some 37 years earlier by Theodor Herzl.
Yes, it gets so deep, and whenever you realize that they're working together, I think it's kind of like an allegory and a metaphor for how our reality really works, right? We have these two opposing forces that seem to be separate in the public, like good and evil, but they're really working in tandem here. That's what I think it is, that the good and evil are actually working together in this reality. It's just perceived that they're separate. So it's not only on a physical level. All of these countries and these different governments, they seem to be at war and at battle with each other, when really they're all working together, just like how the dark and the light, perceived dark and light, is working spiritually through us. They're working together. They're working in tandem.
I agree. And that was always the ancient cosmological conception of how the universe originated. And it was also the eschatological conception that in the end, chaos and disorder would triumph over light and order. And that is what they're trying to bring about now, is the conclusion of this cosmological cycle. In the beginning, there is the great cosmic egg, which bursts out light, which in Kabbalah becomes Adam Kadmon, but in the Orphic mystery religions of the Greeks was Phanes Protogenes, who served as the light bringer, first begotten, which is what his name literally translates to. That became Jesus Christ, who was this logos figure that Philo-Judaeus incorporated into Judaism when he Hellenized Judaism in the first century, at the very time that Jesus was said to have lived. And so all of this is being done artificially by design. It's the fulfillment of a very ancient plan to pit what they call the forces of light and the forces of darkness. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Qumran Scrolls, it talks about, the War Scroll talks about the sons of light and the sons of darkness. and this war of extermination between those two forces. And the sons of light are to triumph over the sons of darkness. And in Lurianic Kabbalah, all of this most ancient cosmology is incorporated into the idea that there were the 10 Sephirotic vessels, and that the light was emanated into the uppermost vessel initially. And there were also 4 or 5 worlds, depending if you want to consider Tohu, chaos, the uppermost and highest original world. And when this light was emanated into the uppermost vessel, it then transferred down like a lightning bolt into all of the lower vessels. But the 7 most lower vessels across the great abyss, which divides the realm of the gods from the lower realm of the planets, this 7 lower vessels were weak and immature, and they shattered. And when they shattered, they formed what Kabbalists refer to as husks or shells, which in the Hebrew is kelipot. And these husks and shells are composed of the material, the matter of chaos. And that is what the sons of darkness are composed of. The sons of light are composed of that divine light. And that divine light, which emanated down as a lightning bolt, is considered to be the holy serpent of light. And chaos is viewed as the dark serpent, the evil serpent. So the light becomes the progenitor and the parents of the sons of light. And Satan, the evil serpent, becomes the parents of the sons of darkness. And just as the light gives order and masters over chaos, the sons of light have the divine right to be the masters over the sons of darkness, and eventually to eliminate them. The sons of light, when these vessels shattered, were trapped in divine vessels that were made by the light itself. And the light has a supposed divine desire to cling to these vessels. So they view themselves as what they call Kelipa Noga, which means shining shells. And they view
the shining ones. Is that where the shining ones come from? The shining ones?
Never heard of what you're referring to.
Well, some people...
Is that something from Enoch or Baruch or something?
They think that the shining ones were sort of like the Anunnaki.
That's what I thought you were referring. Yeah, I have seen that before. Now that you mention it, I recall that now.
Yeah. I was just curious if there was a connection, and that's how the shining ones were kind of created and put into this thought form, because we know that a lot of the names have been changed of these deities. It's all been inverted. I think that we've actually been worshiping the wrong God this entire time, right? Jesus is actually Satan, and Satan is actually Jesus, and they've been siphoning off of our energy onto a God that we know absolutely nothing about, and it's the wrong God. I mean, if you look around the world, like, how can this world be based on a loving and caring God? The only conclusion that you can come to is that we've been giving our thoughts, energy, and prayers to something that does not have our best interest. And then if you look at, the morning star, and that was a mistranslation from Lucifer in the Hebraic text. And then what is morning star? Then you got Hallel ben Sharar in there, which was another translation. And ben Sharar means son of the morning, and son of the morning and son of dawn. And then it only comes to the conclusion that Jesus is actually Lucifer, and Jesus can't. And we've been worshiping this Lucifer figure. We've been tricked into worshiping and giving our praise and thanks to the wrong God. What do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. That's the thesis of several of my books. And that was the way it was originally perceived by the Gnostic Christians. They stated in the Apocryphon of John that it was Jesus who provided Adam and Eve with gnosis, with knowledge from the tree of knowledge. And that figure is known in Judaism to be Satan. And it was a trap. It was deliberate. They deliberately set about to change the pagan religion, primarily of the Romans and Greeks at that time, to Christianity as a trap, and to lead the non-Israelites into worshiping Satan, because they believe that Satan is the guardian angel of the non-Israelites, and therefore the appropriate religion for what they call the other side, the Sitra Achra, the evil side of chaos, is for Gentiles to worship Satan. It also has this effect of exterminating the non-Israelites, because when they cease to worship the gods that they created, who in turn created them according to their beliefs, those gods perish in the heavens, as above, so below. The gods are like egregores that only exist when people worship them. So when the pagans abandoned their gods, they lost all of their supernatural protection and instead turned their souls over to Satan. And I agree fully with your assessment that this was a deliberate process to steal the souls of the non-Israelites and to have those souls consumed by the Israelites and by their gods. And there was a precedent for this that I believe the ancient Judaists copied in their oral traditions, which created Christianity. And that was the most ancient Egyptian belief was in a master god, Unas, and his servant, Shesmu. Shesmu would tread the winepress, which was symbolic of extracting the blood of human beings and the gods. And this blood represented the grape juice of the winepress, which was then fermented into wine and given to the master god, Unas, who consumed it and filled his belly with the magic and the souls of the other gods and human beings. And that is exactly what Jesus Christ does. He tempts everyone to bear their own cross and offer themselves as a human sacrifice to the gods, so that the gods can consume the energy, is the way the Egyptians described it, the energy and the magic of their souls and the energy and the magic of their gods can be consumed by this master god and by Shesmu himself. So that is the trap that Christianity is. Because the Israelites were so few in number and physically powerless, they utilized their intellect, which they believe the first intellect is the greatest force in the universe, to become the master over the chaos, which they thought of the Romans as being Edom and as being the chaos of Satan. So they were doing what their gods had done. They were imposing order and light on the chaos by becoming the master of it and rendering chaos their slave that they would exterminate. So they viewed other human beings as this slavish force of chaos and themselves as the divine intellect bringing order and light. And when they say that light will emerge from darkness, what they're saying is that non-Israelites will be exterminated and Israelites will become masters of chaos. But that is simply the first phase, which is to take place in the initial 6,000 years from the creation of Adam until the present day. After that, what happens according to the cosmology of the ancients, is that through the process of entropy, the darkness and the chaos assimilates all of the light and order, and the darkness begins to shine. And that is the eighth candle on the menorah after the 7 days when the darkness shines. And then chaos triumphs, frees itself from the order of the gods. And then the Israelites plan to become gods of their own, in which they have the intellect and the ripened knowledge of the fruit of the tree of good and evil, knowledge of good and evil. They can then consume that ripened fruit, which has since become kosher. And the non-Israelites have served as the gardeners of that knowledge, developing it. And so that poisonous tree that will kill off the non-Israelites through nuclear war, through biological weaponry, chemical weaponry, conventional warfare, utilization of metallurgy to destroy human life. That poisonous fruit will have ripened, and then it can be utilized to create genetically engineered immortal androgynes. And the goal of Judaism has always been that at the culmination of that 6,000 years, creation is a process, not a moment. The fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil will have ripened and will give them the knowledge which will allow them to restore their state back to the state of Adam before he was separated into Adam and Eve, where he could live in paradise, where nature would provide everything without any labor and without the curse of death. And they are now at the cusp of fulfilling that ancient plan, because they have now largely developed the technology to artificially create life, which was the province and the domain of the gods, and to give order to chaos, whatever order their will designs and seeks. So they believe that they can now get rid of the non-Israelite slaves, either create post-human slaves who have computers implanted in their brains, which eliminate their souls, which they have consumed, and they can utilize them as slaves, or they can simply utilize robotics. And their goal is to create 600,000 of these immortal androgynes. And in Israel, they have developed the technologies to convert male skin cells into egg cells so that they can utilize male semen and egg cells they generate from men so that they can create self-generating creatures. So they have converted themselves into the gods. And that was always the goal of Judaism. Adam and Eve were forbidden to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil and from the tree of life, because the gods feared that that would enable them to slay the gods and become their own gods. And the Tower of Babel was destroyed for the same reason, because the gods feared that human beings would ascend the Tower of Babel and slay the gods in the heavens.
But was the tower an actual tower, or was it some kind of technology? I think that
I think
maybe it
it was
was.
symbolic of the Platonic idea of ascending the seven planets
Yeah.
to the gods. It was the concept, the light had initially emanated from the monad, from the one, and fallen down, and that's emanation. The other opposition to emanation is epistrophe, which is an ascent. And it is symbolized in the Old Testament as Jacob's ladder. And in the New Testament, Jesus Christ becomes Jacob's ladder. And I think the Tower of Babel is symbolic of that ascent to the heavenly realm. And in Kabbalah, there's the concept of as above, so below, the earth below, the temple below, and the heavenly temple and the heavenly earth. And the idea is to lift the present world, Olam Hazeh, to the world to come, with where the earthly temple will become the heavenly temple, and the earth will ascend to heaven. And related to that shining one, you sparked my memory of all of that literature. Yes, that very much relates to the concept of Lucifer as who fell like lightning from the heaven, and the giants, the Nephilim, that are described in Enoch are those shining ones who fell from heaven.
So you mentioned a lot of things in there, and I'm trying to take notes here because I want to comment on some of the things that you were talking about. So these ancient occultists believe that if they go so far into the darkness, into the black hole, they can actually bust out the other side and go and create light. That's basically what you're saying, right? They think that if they can get so far into the darkness, into the blackness, that that will lead to the light. Correct?
There are two strains of thought. One is the right hand path, which pursues goodness and divine light to obtain enlightenment and transcendence to the gods. And then there is the left-hand path, which you are describing, which is the more ancient way, because chaos is the firstborn son of cosmology. You have to have a substratum of chaos before order can be established. So the most ancient beings are the dark, evil, chaotic ones. And in occultism, the most powerful, strongest, insightful seekers believe that they can obtain the greatest power and enter the domain of the ancient ones by pursuing that dark path that you're describing. The ascent of the Kabbalist up the Sephirotic tree back up to Keter, the crown of the tree, is matched by a dark path in the Kalipotic tree. And you can view the two trees as being one tree, the Sephirotic tree as being the crown of one tree, and the Kalipotic tree as being the roots of that tree. And there are two directions that a seeker, an adept, can take in his efforts to achieve the unio mystica, the mystical reunion with the gods. Since we are supposedly divine sparks that were emanated by the gods, it is only our bodies which cling to the material world and the lusts of the material world, which inhibit the soul from ascending back to the divine light from which it originated. But if you read the first chapter of Genesis, on the fourth day, it talks about the light of darkness, the light of the moon and the light of the stars. And that is the more powerful light. So there have always been this two ways of pursuing the path to the reunification, the mystical, ecstatic reunification with the gods. And it was always considered to be the more powerful path to take the dark path through the roots of the Kalipotic tree. They also believe at the culmination of the cycle, the two trees flip like an hourglass. And it is actually, in the view of the occultists, it is the Kalipotic tree, which is the crown of the tree, the branches. And the Sephirotic tree is actually the root system. And the daylight is weak and less powerful. And the serpent assimilates all the light in its travel down the Sephirotic vessels. It absorbs all of that light from the Sephirot and then transfers it to the Kalipot below, which are trapped in the womb of the earth and the darkness for the first 6,000 years. But then that hourglass flips. Evil triumphs over good. The darkness has assimilated all the light because the evil serpent has consumed all the light in the Sephirotic vessels and carried it down into the Kalipotic vessels. And at that point, evil triumphs and is free from order and the light of day, and then becomes the gods itself. And at that point, the Kabbalists cease to worship or believe in the Torah, because the Torah is only the written law for the first 6,000 years. It then becomes valueless and is to be abandoned, as is the God Yahweh, who is then to be abandoned. But Jesus Christ, at the culmination of those 6,000 years, as Satan, then becomes the primary God. Jesus Christ is the Messiah, son of Joseph. His father was literally named Joseph. There is another Messiah who is the Messiah, son of David. The Messiah, son of Joseph, rules over the Gentiles in the exile. The Messiah, son of David, is to rule the world from Jerusalem, from the throne in Zion. Since the Israelites are the second-born, they lack the highest soul of the firstborn, of chaos, of Messiah, son of Joseph, Mashiach Yechida Mashiach. The soul of the Messiah resides in Jesus. Jesus has the soul of Satan, which is considered the highest soul in Kabbalah. Messiah, son of David, doesn't have that soul, so he is the body, the vessel. That's why Jesus has to perish and give up his soul, so that his soul can then enter Messiah, son of David, and the two serpents then unite, like in the Caduceus. They entwine and become one serpent because they are one serpent. And in the
Because we've been
Kabbalistic,
separated. Really quick before I forget, there's this one verse in the book of Revelation, I believe it's 22:16, where this other, it just sparked my memory and sparked my thought here when you're talking about this other Messiah, because it says in Revelation 22:16, I am the brute and the offspring of David and the bright and shining morning star. Right. So
yes,
could this be the other Messiah that's revealing itself in the Bible?
um, Jesus specifically rejected the idea that he was the Messiah, son of David, because there's a passage, Psalm 110:1, where David calls the Messiah, son of Joseph, Lord, and the Lord cannot be the Son. And therefore, Jesus distinguished himself as Messiah, son of Joseph, and the descendants, the root of David and the root of Jesse, are the Messiah, son of David. But they are actually one. They are the vessel and the soul, the body and the soul, the body and the light, but it's the dark light. So Jesus is what you're describing, because his soul ultimately combines with the body of King David after he dies, after the evil serpent is slain or imprisoned. It then enters the body, the vessel of Messiah, son of David, and they become one. But the Kabbalists confirm what I had always said. Jesus returns himself as the Antichrist to smite all the non-Israelites and all the Christians. And that is what the final judgment in Revelations is all about. And Jesus comes back, and in Revelation 19, and I forget exactly, maybe 14 and 21, he says that Jesus treads the winepress to the point where the blood flows up to the horses' bridles. So Christians have been duped into worshiping Jesus. Now, Satan plays specific roles in Judaism. Satan is the tempter. He witnesses all sin because he tempts all sin. He then becomes the accuser in the heavenly court. When judgment is passed, he becomes the punisher. And he is in the fifth Sephirah of Gevurah, and he plays a very useful function in that way. So all Israelites who have been tempted to become Christians are punished, and all of the non-Israelites who have become Christians are slated to be completely exterminated. And Jesus leads them into this trap, and this trap is described explicitly in the Gospel of Judas and in the Apocalypse of Abraham. And the Apocalypse of Abraham really talks about how all Christians will be exterminated by Christ himself, and all of the apostate Jews who have succumbed to the temptation of Jesus will likewise be exterminated, but they will also be tortured first. So Messianic Jews have it even worse than Gentile Christians. And this was always the plan. The Apocalypse of Abraham was written in the first century, was contemporary with or prior to the Gospel of Mark, which is the first Orthodox Christian gospel. So it's very clear that this was always the plan. And that plan was later confirmed by the Gospel of Judas, where it expressly states that the disciples of Christ are deceivers who lead the cattle into the slaughter to be slaughtered as sacrifices and give up their souls, as you describe, to be consumed by the gods. There is also the story in the Old Testament, in Genesis, of Esau and Jacob. Esau is the firstborn son, the first twin, so he is chaos. Jacob is the secondborn, so he is light. He has the higher first intellect, but it is Esau that bears the higher soul of chaos. So Jacob is envious because chaos inherits the present world and the world to come. The firstborn son always inherits a double portion. So Jacob wanted to inherit that double portion. And he first tried to deceive Esau by grabbing his heel and pulling him back into Rebekah's womb. And that is idiomatic for the name Jacob, which means he who deceives, the one who grabs the heel. But once they are born, Isaac is to give them their blessings. And Esau is to receive the blessing of the firstborn to the present world and to the world to come. And also his blessing is to have the soul of chaos, the highest soul of Yechida. So Jacob tricks both Esau and Isaac. He tricks Esau when Esau is famished into surrendering his birthright and blessings by giving him a bowl of lentil soup, which is red like blood. Blood is the seat of the soul. So what he is doing is exchanging this artificial lentil soup for Esau's soul, and he is stealing that soul in the same way that Shesmu steals all the souls and consumes them.
And then guess what we do? We also, Christians, drink the blood of Christ and eat the body of Christ too. It's been a thing that's been carried down from this period of time that you're talking about. And we still do it today. It's a ritual, I think.
And if I may speak to that, that cup from which the Christians drink it is the cup of God's wrath, which is described in Jeremiah as the cup that brings death and extermination to the non-Israelites. And the wine itself is symbolic of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. In 3rd Baruch, it specifies that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is a grapevine. So when Jesus is offering up his blood as wine, what he is Satan offering up the dead fruit, the poisonous fruit, the serpent's venom of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, just as Satan did to Adam and Eve. And since that fruit is unripe, it brings the curse of death. So when Christians consume the Eucharist from the cup of God's wrath, from the Holy Grail symbolically, they are consuming death. They are poisoning themselves. But ultimately, that knowledge becomes ripe, and the Christians serve as the gardeners of the tree of knowledge of good and evil until some point where it becomes ripe. And in these early scrolls, in the Qumran scrolls and in Kabbalah, Christians were always described as preparing an empire that the Israelites would then take over once the fruit became ripe after 2,000 years of Christianity. So all of these things have always served a purpose, and it was always anticipated that this kingdom that Christ would build would be usurped. And then Christ is the reincarnation of the souls of Cain and Esau. That soul has to return back to Jacob because Esau gave up his soul, his birthrights, to Jacob. So after the Roman Empire, is the way they refer to it as Edom, after Edom builds this empire, the Israelites are to overtake it and to inherit it. And then Christ becomes the Antichrist and slays all of the Christians, all the descendants of Rome, which means all Europeans. And they will be eliminated from the earth. And then the Israelites will become masters of the earth. That was always the plan. And that plan is described throughout the Old Testament. And in Isaiah chapter 63, this messianic figure is described as treading the winepress, meaning stomping on the heads and extracting all the blood of the non-Israelites. And that's the role that Satan, that Jesus will play.
So you mentioned that the Israelites earlier, they want to kind of bring back this this return to the times of Adam and Eve. But whenever you look at it's in the Kabbalah that it states that the Garden of Eden wasn't actually in this 3D physical reality. It was in part of the tree of life called Yesod, which is the foundation stone, which can be looked at as the fourth dimension. And that Adam and Eve was in this fourth dimension, and Adam was Adam was one, Adam was androgynous, and God, or the angels of God, which is described as Jehovah Elohim, split Adam into Eve. And then that, I think, from my studies and my research, that's what really created this kind of duality in this reality. And I'm not too sure if the original sin was actually eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. I think that the tree of knowledge of good and evil is a symbolic, and they were kicked out of the Garden of Eden into this 3D physical world where lust and greed. I think that the original sin was actually lust, and it had something to do with the um, sounds weird, but like the orgasm, right? The orgasm of the
The
physical
original
flesh.
orgasm is the bursting of the cosmic egg and the release of light. Yesod is the phallus, which releases that orgasmic force. It sits between Malkut below, which is the womb, which is Mother Earth, which is the female aspect of God, Shekhinah. And then above is Tiferet, which is Yahweh. So Yahweh's phallus, Yesod, becomes aroused by knowledge because Yesod is the seat of the Messiah, son of Joseph, who is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, who is Satan, the one that enables humanity to gain this knowledge, which can then turn human beings into androgynes. And it was always the plan of the alchemists and the occultists to create homunculi and the golem, and to gain control over chaos, to engineer it back into the form of Adam. What you bring up about Adam is very important. Yes, there was originally a heavenly Garden of Eden, and Adam and Eve did not have flesh. They were purely divine light. And the idea that they became ashamed and had to be dressed is explained by the Kabbalists as that they had to become clothed in the flesh. And that is when they obtained their bodies and were trapped in the material world, in the womb. Chaos is the womb. The light is the seminal fluid. So the seminal fluid is emitted into the darkness, and it is the commingling of the two, the polarity of yin and yang, which brings about creation. The female is the negative, the darkness, the womb aspect of that polarity, and the male is the phallus, orgasmically emitting the light, which becomes the logoi spermaticoi, that provides the rational essence of order that forms the material world into an ordered world. And the more ordered it becomes, the higher it ascends and becomes closer and closer to the order of the gods, the ideal order. So the forms that we see are illusions taking place in chaos. The lowest form is the womb itself, which is infinitely particular. Every individual infinitesimal point is different from any other one. It exists ultimately ephemerally in only one point in time, at which point it changes into something else chaotically. As this substratum of chaos obtains more order, it becomes matter. Ordered matter becomes the chemicals and minerals that we observe. Those minerals, when they are given even higher order, become plants. Plants become animals. Animals become human beings. And all of these living beings have souls, which come from the world soul, the one soul, which is called the Guf or Adam Kadmon in Kabbalah. All of this relates to Platonism and Neoplatonism. It's a copy of it. But it is, as you describe, this process of going from ultimate disorder to complete unity, where there is no separation of elements. God is one ineffable unity. And the goal of the Kabbalist and of the occultist is to reunite with that unity, to abandon the flesh and to become the divine spark as part of one. And they call that the death of the ego. And people who take ayahuasca and DMT and other things claim that they experience this death of the ego, where they lose their sense of self and realize that everything is one and they have to be a part of that one without any individual attributes.
It's also described in the Kabbalah that that there's an eighth level, because there's seven fundamental levels of the Kabbalah, which I think that if you flip the tree of life over, there's seven underneath it as well in this physical reality, and seven above it. So there would actually be 14. But there's a sacred secret level in the Kabbalah known as the eighth sphere, right?
That all that derives from the Mithraic, which became the Platonic idea that there are seven planets and seven heavens. And to ascend, the soul initially descended down those seven planets, beginning with the planet Saturn to the Earth. And it has to reascend up the seven planets. The eighth is going into the divine realm and crossing the great abyss, which separates those seven from the eighth. And all of this was described in Platonism as the Great Divide. The seven lower Sephirot are known as the six are the sun, the Zer Anpin, which exists below the upper three, who form the cosmic parents and the androgyne, the trinity of the divine. You have the male aspect of the father, the female aspect of the mother, and the two combined become the androgynous son. Adam Kadmon is viewed as the androgynous son. Phanes Protogenus was the androgynous son of Kronos and Ananka. And Jesus Christ is the androgynous son of Yahweh and the Holy Spirit, which is Shekhinah or Asherah in Kabbalah. So going back to what you were describing about the fall of Adam, in Kabbalah, it was originally believed that Adam only recognized Shekhinah, who is the goddess Asherah of the sea in the Canaanite mythology, and that this angered Yahweh and created a division between the Godhead's male aspect Yahweh and female aspect Shekinah, which caused them to separate. And as above, so below, because the gods had been caused by this sin of Adam of only worshiping the female aspect of God, Shekinah, and not even acknowledging or recognizing the fact that there was the male aspect, made Yahweh jealous. And that is the source of Yahweh's jealousy. He's jealous of his own female aspect. When those two separated, so below, Adam separated into his male aspect, Adam, and his female aspect, Eve, which enabled there to be procreation, where one would only survive one generation. But then the children of procreation would offer the opportunity for the Gilgul, the reincarnation of the soul in the next generation. This was viewed as both a catastrophe and a blessing. The catastrophe was necessary for the blessing of rectification to take place, because in each successive reincarnation, the soul is punished in death and then returns in a more perfected form. And ultimately, Adam had within him all the 600,000 souls of the Israelites. Those souls tried to find their soulmates and marry, and when they do, when they find that other ideal half of their own soul, they have a happy marriage. If they marry the soul of a different twin soul, they have an unhappy marriage and produce children who are an abomination. So all of this is viewed as a catastrophe, but it was a necessary catastrophe. Just as the God Yahweh has the male aspect Yahweh, the Godhead has the male aspect Yahweh, female aspect Shekinah. Human beings have the male aspect and the female aspect. Also, Satan has a male aspect and a female aspect. His male aspect is called Samael, and his female aspect is called Lilith. And it is Lilith who impregnated Eve with Cain, and Cain is the ancestor of all non-Israelites. Abel and Seth were the actual product of Adam and his female aspect, Eve, procreating. So they have a singular and divine nature. So the Israelites believe they inherited only that aspect of Seth. Abel still had a little bit of the residue of the semen of Satan. It was cleansed, and that's why Abel had to die. And then Seth was more purified. So they believe that the descendants of Jacob, the Israelites, have pure souls. But the Jesus has this dual nature of being both of Satan and of Eve, and therefore has a human and a godly aspect. But the godly aspect is that highest soul of Satan, that Yechida soul, that Israel wants to capture for itself and steal the birthright of the non-Israelite world and steal its soul.
It's interesting that you brought up Lilith in there as being the feminine version of Satan, and that makes a lot of sense. I've done a little bit of research into Lilith, and I've read some of the Book of Lilith, I think it's called, and I think that she's kind of gotten a bad rap a little bit. You know, I don't know, but
well,
yeah,
there was an interesting movement in the 19th century. Feminism was born out of the idea that Lilith was a good figure because she was independent of Adam. In Kabbalah, Lilith was Adam's first wife, and they slept together. But Lilith said to Adam, "We're both made out of the same clay, and therefore we are equal, and I should not have to lie beneath you and submit to your lusts." And she then became independent. As in Milton's Paradise Lost, the idea is that Satan, and as in Gnosticism, especially in Gnosticism, Satan is the good figure because Satan provides freedom and knowledge from Yahweh's lies. Yahweh lied to Eve and said, if you eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you will surely die. Satan informed her that she wouldn't die. She ate of that knowledge. Her eyes were opened. She viewed herself as blessed, and she realized that Yahweh was a liar.
So was Yahweh there during the time of the way that you're explaining it? Yahweh was kind of this God overseeing Adam and Eve. But from my research, I don't know if Yahweh was actually there. The angel that was said to have created Adam and Eve was Jehovah Elohim. So where does from what you're saying, Yahweh was also there in the garden as well?
Jehovah is the tetragrammaton, Yod He Vav He. It is the four-letter name of God. Yahweh is simply considered to be a better pronunciation. The divine name was never meant to be spoken. It invokes divine powers. It can be abused. If it's spoken, it can cause a catastrophe. When the temple was destroyed, all of those pronunciations were lost. The problem is that Hebrew does not contain vowels in its alphabet. It only contains consonants. So it's not known how these words are properly pronounced. Elohim is Hebrew for the gods. El comes from the Canaanite god El, the father god. His wife was Asherah. They had the son Baal. That's where this Trinity idea initially comes from. The Judahites considered themselves to be in this divine kingdom ruled over by the god Baal. And they didn't like that because Baal was just a son. So they then assigned to themselves the father god El. And El has a female aspect, so El is referred to as the Elohim, Him being the plural of El. and El became the generic word for God, or gods in the case of Elohim. So when you say Jehovah Elohim, you are saying the tetragrammaton Yod He Vav He, or Yahweh, the male aspect of God.
So
Now
they're the
that,
same being, just pronounced differently. Then.
yes, and they claim that neither of those is the correct pronunciation, and that if we were to speak the correct pronunciation, it would be catastrophic. But they believe they have certain Kabbalistic leaders who can invoke that divine name and achieve whatever results they want. It's like a talisman, a magic power that they have to invoke that divine name. This is very similar to the Greeks. The Greeks said you weren't supposed to speak the proper name of Zeus. And most religions had that kind of idea, that the name was to be ineffable and never to be spoken.
But is that because they don't really know his name? You know what I mean? Like that would be the perfect way to hide it. Oh yeah, you can't speak his name. It'd be catastrophic. But we don't. Little do you know, we don't really even know it. You
I'm
know?
sure that's a big part of it. But I think there was also a reluctance. Well, that it was around that time that they did become reluctant to ever speak the name of God. It was considered blasphemous and dangerous. And it is definitely a major part of Kabbalah. And that's why you'll see sometimes when you see Orthodox Jews discussing things on the internet, they never write out the name of God as God. They always hyphenate it, G-D. That is to prevent any attempt to speak the name of God.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't think anybody, because all these names have been switched around, inverted, created, and
The
uh,
whole Hebrew language has been. They have no idea whatsoever of what original Hebrew was. And the Masoretes and others tried to impose what they learned from the Greek translation of the Septuagint of names back into Hebrew, and from what they understood of Arabic, which is a related language, and Aramaic, they tried to recreate Hebrew, but nobody, it's really a made up language. They have no way of knowing what it originally was.
yeah, then when you
That's
look at
probably true of every other language as well.
yeah, because when you look at English, vowels weren't invented by the time that the Bible was even translated into English. So you know all the names are wrong. You know that Jesus wasn't his real name, and I think that the vowel L's was like some kind of contract that we had to maybe sign with a group of beings or a group of gods. Because when you look at Val L, you have El at the end of it. Maybe it was some kind of contract with the Elohim gods to hijack our language in some sort of way. Not too sure. I haven't put everything together on that, but it kind of makes sense.
Well,
Because words are
Latin
important, right?
from the alphabet is the alphabet that English is based on, and it had vowels. But what you're describing is very similar to what a famous Kabbalist in the 13th century, around 1250, Abraham Abulafia, described. And he said that Hebrew was the original language and all other languages were derived from it, and that Hebrew has mystical, magical powers, and that to speak Hebrew, when you speak it, you can see how words were derived, the gematria, and the three different ways that Kabbalists have of deriving hidden meanings from the language, all originates in Hebrew, and that all other languages have roots that came from Hebrew that emerged when the generation of confusion was made after the destruction of the Tower of Babel. So there is a mystical precedent for what you're describing. And the chief proponent was that Kabbalist who created the idea of ecstatic Kabbalah, Abraham Abulafia. So I suggest if you're interested in that, you can look into him.
Abraham Aviafia,
Abulafia,
Abulafia.
Abulafia, Abraham Abulafia, very famous Kabbalist,
So if
very
people
important
are
Kabbalist. And he said that Satan and Jesus are one and the same being.
Yeah, that's what I've come to the conclusion of too in doing my studies and doing my research. And that was a big reason that I really wanted to bring you on to talk about it because, our energy and our prayers and everything has been siphoned off to this, other God that we have absolutely no idea about. And it's creating the chaos and the destruction that we've seen for decades and thousands of years, and it's going to get nothing but worse. I'm in fear of. So, if people are really interested in, finding out the truth about this, what book would you have them study? Would it would they study the Kabbalah? Would they study all of their religions, or because I think that a majority of it is all allegorical and metaphorical. There's a hidden meaning behind all of it, and a majority of it isn't meant to be taken literal. It's meant to be deciphered. Loose cipher. You have to cipher the Bible. You have to cipher whatever it is that you're reading, and we know that the Bible is just a greatest hits conglomeration of much older religions and much older teachings. So if you were to recommend something for someone to do to actually, figure this whole mess out, what would be the first thing that you would have them do?
I would have them read my book, Beware the World to Come, which they can find at cjbbooks.com. The problem is if they attempt to study Kabbalah, the primary book would be the Zohar, which is voluminous. It's composed of several books and chapters. Not all of it has been translated or properly translated. The translations have been sanitized. So they're not going to learn anything. And on top of that is that it is all encrypted and encoded so that even when the majority of rabbis try to read it, they get nothing out of it. It makes no sense to them. To understand it, you have to be taught what it is that is actually being encoded in these allegorical stories. And that's not going to happen. Nobody is going to teach you that. The way that I came to understand it, being an outsider, is that I realized that it came from Gnosticism and from Neoplatonism. And Neoplatonism was not encoded. Neoplatonism was written in such a way as to most accurately as they were able describe these Platonic beliefs and how it is that the cosmos originated and what it means. And the hostility, this dualism between the forces of good and evil was also very well described in the Hermetics and in the Mithraic mystery schools, and described by the Orphic, the Eleusinian, and the Samothracian mystery schools. So by coming to understand all of that, when I obtained that knowledge, I could gain a proper perspective on what it is that the Kabbalists were actually describing and talking about in their coded language. So that enabled me to decipher Kabbalah. And I put my findings into my book, Beware the World to Come, into my book, Rise Above the Gods Who Hate Us, and into my series, Satanic Secrets of Jesus Christ. I don't think anyone has a chance at arriving at that kind of knowledge without reading my books, because nobody's been able to do it for 2,000 years. I'm the first one who has decoded all of this. And I was also assisted by the writings of Johann Andreas Eisenmenger, who exposed what it is that Judaism believed. But because he was a Christian, he wasn't able to understand the full import of the fact that Jesus is Satan and the Messiah, son of Joseph, and how Christianity itself was the way that all of this was meant to be brought about to fruition, to the point where the non-Israelites would be exterminated and the Israelites would become the sole heirs of the world to come.
What do you feel about reincarnation? Do you think that we're reincarnated on the planet, and then whenever we die, we ascend up these this levels of the tree of life, and then we're recycled back through, and then we have to start from the beginning. What do you think's going on there?
That would be a good topic for another show, because when we discuss reincarnation, what we're generally discussing is the idea that there's a soul independent of the body, and that the body is simply a vessel which houses that soul and affords it the opportunity of being in a material world. I think that is relates to how it is that consciousness is generated in kind of a Minkowski space-time, and that relates to the views of the Eleatic Greeks, Parmenides and Zeno, that being and becoming are different things, and becoming is the process of becoming ideal in being and becoming eternal. It's difficult to fit the concept of reincarnation into that other than in a Platonic sense. And I don't believe it. I don't believe that the soul is reincarnated to become perfected. What I believe is something very similar to reincarnation is the idea of the logoi spermaticoi, of DNA, of spermatozoa uniting with an egg to form a new crystalline structure of DNA that is a replication and yet something unique of the organism which produced it, and that we are reincarnated in a very real sense when we bear children, and that we ought to bear children and ought to bear children as much as possible. We ought to create a world in which those children flourish and in which we live as long as possible. And that creates the greatest system of reincarnation and the greatest lifespan within this timelessness that we perceive through consciousness to be ephemeral and changing, but in reality itself is all unified and unchanging and eternal.
That's really interesting. I agree with a lot of that, because my ideas and my thoughts and my beliefs are changing all the time, right? If I still believed what I believed a year ago, then I'm not growing. I'm not, expanding consciously. I would love to bring you back on to talk about that, because I find it, some people believe in, reincarnation, but I think it's fragments. I think that whenever we die and we come back, and if someone remembers some kind of past life, I think it's just fragments of other consciousness or other souls that's maybe attached onto us, and what we're considering to be a past life really isn't a past life. It's just these attachments and these things that have locked onto us in a way, and maybe from lives that you never even lived. They're just kind of random, maybe like a disembodied kind of attachment or something like that. And then we die, like all of those kind of fall off. And then whenever you come back, if it's actually you coming back, a whole other group of consciousness or souls, whatever you want to call them, then attaches onto you again. And it's not necessarily that you lived any of those lives. It's just fractalized uh, parts of consciousness that's attached onto you.
There have been others who had similar views. Carl Jung said that we have memories encoded into our genetics, into our DNA. And he worked on theories with Wolfgang Pauli, which are similar to what you're describing. And I have some similar conceptions into how it is that our consciousnesses are able to form an image that we recognize that other beings are conscious. And we can arrive at an agreement through the use of language as to what it is that exists simultaneously amongst us and amongst our consciousnesses. And we have this ability in the physical realm to recognize one another as conscious beings, to interact, and to arrive at some kind of similar understanding of what it is in the noumenal world that we perceive as phenomenon within our consciousnesses. And also, if we ever get together and talk about this, we can discuss how that process is manipulated politically by lying to us about what we should perceive as our memories and our understanding of the past, about lying to us about what is happening in the present, and lying to us about what we should expect from the future. Because our consciousness is created to conceive of things in this arrow of time that is from the past to the present to the future, and how those who have the ability to educate us and to provide us with the media that our consciousness is exposed to have the ability to engineer our perceptions in such a way as to enslave us with our own thoughts.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it any better. Thank you, my friend. And well, if you look at it too, water is a memory and we're basically made up of water. So it makes sense that whenever we come into this reality, we're going to be storing some kind of memory along with being in this 3D physical body. But that'll be for a completely different show. I'd love to bring you back on. Where can people find you online? Where can they grab your books? Give you a chance to plug that really quick.
The best option would be to go to my website. It's my initials, cjbbooks.com. No spaces, no hyphens, just straight out cjbbooks.com. You'll find my books there. You'll find links where you can buy them as paperbacks and also as PDF files.
The links to Christopher's information will be in the description of this video. If you like this discussion, I highly recommend you go check out his website and grab his books. Wonderful information and research that he's done on a lot of this stuff. So for everyone else, thanks for watching, listening. Much love to everyone in the chat. Please be sure to hit the thumbs up button, help the channel out in the YouTube algorithm. Share, subscribe, hit the bell icon as well for notifications. The link to my channel on Rokfin is in the description. Sign up over there. Hit the follow button for my premium content. Also, you can catch this episode and any of my other episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, and download them directly to your device for free on Spreaker.com. And remember, we're not only in a spiritual war, but a war on humanity. Stay aware, stay alert, keep loving your heart for everyone, stay safe out there. And if you can see through the illusion, you are the solution. See you guys next time.